Students in Kansas government classes learn about the three branches of government, the differences between the House of Representatives and the Senate, and how laws are passed. This gives them an understanding of the process for making laws. This focus leaves out one important component: the people who serve as elected officials. These 55 women and men have been leading the Kansas Legislature as elected officials. Some became speakers of the House or presidents of the Senate. 2 became governor. Others performed other leadership roles or chaired important committees. They came from all parts of the state. 38 were Republicans, 17 Democrats. 33 men, 22 women. Their interviews provide insight into their motivations for running for office. The Kansas Oral History Project has been collecting their unique stories because their voices and actions have shaped our state's character. The project has interviewed 55 Kansas legislators about their impact on life in Kansas. They continue to influence our lives today and will do so in the future through the public policies they helped create and shape.
I had a great life because I got to do what I really enjoyed, which was being out there running the cattle. And I didn't like driving a tractor, but I did enjoy agriculture. And then I'd get to come down here in the winter, and so my brother would have to feed cattle in the winter while I was here at the legislature.
I became political, so to speak, by happenstance. In 1970s, I was chairman of the Lenexa Area Chamber of Commerce, and there were several of us presidents of the chambers who had lunch together once a month or so, periodically anyway, and we were not satisfied with our representation, so we decided we must find someone to run. So we tried, and so on and so forth. We couldn't find anybody who wanted to do it, so we decided one of us must do it. And since I was precinct committeeman and chairman of the city precinct committees, they decided that I was probably the most political and I should run. I didn't particularly want to, I didn't think much of it, but then I really was not politically involved up to that point in time. I didn't know what it involved and so on. If I'd have known, maybe I wouldn't have done it. But anyway.
The reason I loved being in politics when I discovered it in college, I didn't want to be one of the people that sat around, reacting to what was on TV, what Johnny Carson at that time had been saying on the Tonight Show. I wanted to be there when the decisions were being made, not only how to do things, but what we were going to do things about. So setting the agenda.
I had decided earlier that I wanted to be in the legislature. I understood how it affected especially our local schools, and many other things, and felt that it was an opportunity that if I worked hard, I would have a chance. And I worked very, very hard, and I was able to beat him. As you say, I got 67% of the vote, which was sort of astounding for a district that was a very strong Republican district.
I guess I grew up ambitious, and I liked government, liked civics, liked history, and I think I knew when I was in 7th grade that I wanted to go to law school.
Kim Francisco was my representative, and I was looking at his voting record and the things he voted for, and I realized we were total opposites. And so I thought, so I asked the party, I said, well, who do you have running against this guy? Because I don't think he's very good. And they said, well, we don't really have anybody. There's a guy that's run the last 2 races, but he's kind of a token Republican. He just puts his name on the ballot, so Ken's not running unopposed. And I said, well, that doesn't sound very smart to me. And so they said, well, why don't you run? So I decided to run. And I put my name in, and then I was at somewhere, I can't remember, I think at a Republican meeting, and I do a lot of cooking and things. And so one night at the meeting, I stood up and I said, well, I've decided to run for the 90th district, and I don't know much about fundraising, but I do cook. So I said, I'm going to sell pans of lasagna for $30 a pan. I sold 1,000 pans. So I was cooking a lot
of lasagna.
Now that we know more about what motivated these legislators to run for public office, what did they accomplish? What kind of laws did they create? What was their impact on public policy in Kansas? Listen to Senate President Richard Bond from Johnson County, Kansas, describe his role in the renovation of the state capitol.
When I became president of the Senate in 1996,
Right.
a member of the state architect group, a guy named Bill Groth, G-R-O-T-H, came to see me to tell me about the terrible problems we have in this building and how dangerous it is. Bill Groth said, you know, if you're on the fourth or fifth floor of this building and a fire starts on the first floor, you'll be dead in 5 minutes, because this center part of the building will just take the smoke right to the top. There were no alarms. There was nothing to stop a fire. And it was very, very dangerous. No extinguishers, nothing. In addition to that, he said, you know, we've got chunks of limestone falling off this building and have come close to hitting people. The building was in terrible shape. They had, at some point, when they put in air conditioning, I think they did it with a chainsaw and just went in and cut holes in the wall and brought through piping for air conditioning. It was horrible. They shut off some of the stairways on up to the upper levels. And so we had major safety issues and major space issues. And so after hearing Bill Groth and others, I put together, well, I went to see the Speaker, and I went to see the Governor, and I went to see the several of the leaders of important committees of the Senate and House, and said, guys, we've got to do something. The Iowa, Ohio, and Minnesota had all finished restoration. And so I got us some airplanes and flew to those three sites. We went overnight to Ohio, but we did day trips to Iowa and Minnesota to see how they did it. And in fact, walking in here this morning, you walk in the visitors area, and here's a map on the floor of the state of Kansas with your county on it. That was an idea I stole from Ohio. And I watched all these kids come in from all around Ohio, and they want to stand on their county that's on the floor. And then in Ohio, they had a little classroom, and when the kids got off the bus, they went into it and sat down and had a video that said, this is what you're going to see. This is what the Capitol is all about. And I said, we've got to have that. And so many of these things we stole from other states. For example, when you and I started here, if you wanted to hang up a picture, all you needed was a hammer and a nail, and just hammer it into the wall and hang it up. I hope they still prohibit that, because after a few dozens of years of that, things look pretty bad. And so we were able to put together, and Dave Kerr was a big help in the funding of that as chairman of the Senate Ways and Means Committee. And we were able to come up with a $50 million appropriation for the first tranche of funding for a new building. And I remember, like, my last week as president of the Senate, I had a press conference and said, well, $50 million is going to get us started, but this building may cost, restoration may cost as much as $150 million. Well, $330 million later, and like 14 years of construction, this is what we've got. And it's really fantastic.
There are many strategies for getting a bill passed. Speaker Robin Jennison had an unusual idea on how to get the 1999 transportation plan passed. And it worked.
That was interesting because what we did, and all governors do it, and nothing against Governor Graves, but when they present their budgets to the legislature, there's some hokey numbers in their budgets, and they all do it. Governor Graves did it too. And we had a meeting that was Governor Graves and President Bond and me talking about the highway plan. And the governor said something that, I'd like to do this, but, it's not something that I'm going to fall on a sword for.
And it wasn't in his budget, right? It was outside of the budget?
It wasn't in his budget at that point. And so we decided to do it, but he wasn't going to help much, basically, was what it was. I mean,
he wanted to do it.
He'd had a good 4 years. I think he'd just gotten reelected. And so it wasn't going to do anything for him. And anyway, so I told him, I said, well, let me pass it over at the House first. Because I think President Bond actually said, well, we'll run it out of the Senate. And I said, no, let me do it over at the House first. And he said, why? And I said, well, because I'm going to pass it without a tax increase. And Governor Graves said, how are you going to do that? I said, I'm going to use your numbers. And he said, well, that won't work. And I said, it'll work as good for this transportation plan as it did for your budget. So we did. That first transportation plan that came out of the House had no tax increase. I think it was a 7-year plan, but I can't remember the years on it.
You obviously allowed some bonding in there. No bonding
No
either.
bonding. It just
pay as you go.
It was pay as you go, used his numbers. And the idea was we would pass it the first time that way and get votes, which we did.
Yeah.
And then
so then it would have a little momentum.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, then President Bond, he had Vidrickson over there. You knew they could pass a transportation.
He's got a highway named after him.
So we passed it that way. It goes over to Senate, and they pass a more reasonable transportation plan, and it goes to conference.
So you're acknowledging that the bill you passed wasn't all that
reasonable.
It wouldn't have worked.
It wouldn't have worked. But it didn't need to work. It just needed to get enough votes to get out of here.
Get on the move.
We did it, and then the Senate passed a plan, and then we went and really negotiated from there, between our plan and their plan, and got one ready and passed it. And we would have passed it because it was good for Southeast Kansas. Governor Graves got a little nervous about it, but yeah, that's how we passed the 99 plan.
One of the most significant and far-reaching pieces of tax legislation during Governor Mike Hayden's term was an amendment to the Kansas Constitution allowing the legislature to classify property for purposes of property taxation. Here, Senator Fred Kerr Pratt recalls why classification became the solution to protect homeowners and farmers from huge property tax increases.
I do know that as far as reappraisal goes, and it was controversial and it was difficult, but the case was made that our appraisals across the state were out of balance. And so whether it was the Board of Tax Appeals or the courts, we had to change. We had to reappraise. And John Carlin was right when it comes to homes and farmland. What the market price is doesn't connect with the value. And so that, I think, was his argument, and correct, that there needed to be a classification, that those two properties needed to be assessed, taxed, at a different, lower level than other properties. So there was good reason for that, and there was lots of negotiation, of course, what those levels should be, both for farmland and homes, so we did arrive at what compromise, and as you say, it was put on the ballot and did pass. As far as the reappraisal goes, it's obvious that when a reappraisal goes into effect, there are going to be some gyrations. And so the people that are on the wrong end, in other words, get taxed higher as a result of a reappraisal, don't like it one bit. And I'm sure that Governor Hayden knew that would be the case. But once we had gone through all the process, which was, I guess, a several-year process to do the reappraising, and then, of course, the classification was kicking in, I don't think it made sense to delay longer. It's time to get it done, put it into place.
Senate President Steve Morris, Hugoton, Kansas, described his efforts to solve a pressing problem: the lack of trained engineers in the state. His efforts resulted in keeping Kansas-trained engineers working in Kansas.
And as you mentioned, the majority of the legislation, the majority of the legislators' time is spent trying to put out fires that are burning at the time, and there's not a lot of time or resources left to do much forward thinking. But in 2007, maybe, I became aware of the engineering shortage in Kansas. And at that time, the major engineering firms in Johnson County and Wichita were a couple of thousand engineers short. And Stuart Bell, who was the dean of the KU School of Engineering at the time, was visiting with me. By the way, he's now the president of Alabama University. Oh, anyway, he mentioned to me that he had one of his current graduates, a female graduate, that started out at $100,000 straight out of school, which I was pretty impressed with. And we talked about how we should try to address the problem, and I decided to try to invite him and John English, the dean at Kansas State University, and a lady, and I don't remember her name, from Wichita State's engineering school, and we met several times and ultimately developed a plan to try to address this. And Kansas was losing a lot of their engineers. Firms were hiring engineers from other parts of the country, East Coast and West Coast, and those folks, once they got settled, a lot of times they didn't have a lot of loyalty to Kansas, so they'd leave, and so you'd have to get somebody else to retrain them. And so we thought it was best if we could try to keep and train our own engineers. And we felt like K through 12 schools needed to do a better job of promoting engineering. So that was part of the project, and trying to get counselors to be up to speed on what's involved in engineering curriculum. And this comprehensive plan took a couple of years, and this was during the recession, so we didn't really have money to do anything until, I think it was 2011. And Governor Brownback wasn't very thrilled with me, so I asked Senator McGinn to take the lead on this, to get it through Ways and Means, which she did, and she did a good job doing that. But we passed a 10-year, $10 million a year program that was meant to do some capital projects for all three universities, and then basically undergo the whole engineering atmosphere in Kansas. And the ultimate goal was to provide 65% more engineers in this state by the time the 10 years were over. And I think we've already reached that goal.
You've just heard some examples of leadership, some in trying situations. How does this kind of leadership develop? What qualities of leadership did they have? How did they move up into leadership positions? Part of the answer is when newly elected representatives and senators arrive in Topeka, they serve on one or more committees. They learn how the process works. They become familiar with the issues and observe the qualities of effective leadership in their colleagues. A number of the project interviewees held one or more leadership positions. Here are some of their observations on leadership.
When I became leader, I'd seen some speakers who maybe tried to flex too much muscle from time to time or tell people what to do. I always tried to remind myself every morning I couldn't fire anybody. You know, I work for the caucus, so you better be careful. Be a good listener and be careful what you say.
It's kind of the same things that it takes to be a community leader. It is being willing to listen to various points of view, and in the end, being both polite and willing to take the lead, because you're going to take a few slings and arrows when you take the lead on issues. You need to be well grounded before you take that lead. You need to understand the issue well and be prepared to defend that position. Not defend to the point where if you discover that there's new information that you should have taken into account, that you're unwilling to come to a different conclusion, but you have to be willing to absorb a few slings and arrows. And in the end, I didn't find it to be all that difficult.
Governor Mike Hayden, in his oral history interview, compared Speaker Pete McGill and Speaker Wendell Leidy as legislative leaders.
Well, they each had a different style. Pete was one of the last of the dinosaurs. He was the old-time speaker. The power of the speaker in those days was awesome. The rules were such that the speaker essentially could rule with an iron hand. And that's not all bad, because he got things done, but it wasn't very collegial in that respect. Pete was of the old school, you know. His motto was, we got a lot of hay down. In other words, get the job done. You know, that's what his whole idea was. We're going to keep the trains running on time. We're going to come here, we're going to do our business, and we're going to leave. And he was of the old school. Wendell he's the only person to ever lead the Republican Party in the House for 6 consecutive years, because of course he was minority leader for 2 years and speaker for 4. Nobody else has ever done that in state history. So that tells you something about what kind of leader he was. But he was, of course, a lot younger. He was a lot more visionary. Pete was of the old school, which isn't bad, but he did it his way. Wendell, he spread the power, so to speak. He relied heavily on his committee chairs and expected them to do the job. Once in a while he'd say, now this is what we're going to do. Pete McGill said that every day. You know, this is what we're going to do. Wendell would say, all right, what do you think we ought to do? I learned from both of them. There's a time when you have to take the gavel and you have to say, this is it. You know, we've had enough, we're going to move ahead. There's other times when you have to let everybody have their say. And so I learned from both of them.
The majority leader has to keep this place running day to day to day, has to be able to whip votes, understand who's where on what issue, and so you really do need the full faith and confidence of your caucus at least, right? But how do you achieve that with when you win by such a close margin?
First of all, you try to be fair with everybody. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of a no surprises kind of guy. I hate to say not everybody in the Senate was a no surprise, but I think if you be open and honest, and we had 3 parties in the Senate. There was no doubt about it. We had 13 Democrats, we had 13 conservative Republicans, and we had 13 moderate Republicans. Then we had that one person. So consequently, in what you did, and on many issues, I had more in common with Anthony Hensley than I had with many of my caucus.
Right, right.
And that's how you got things done. It was a juggling act.
Yeah.
Because he's got to take care of his people, and we ran a lot of races across the rotunda to visit with each other. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it was very frustrating because sometimes we felt like we went over and had our conversations and we agreed on something, and by the time we got back to our side, it had changed. Yeah. So it was just kind of, and maybe it's good because then you meet someplace in the middle. Maybe we were too radical on some things. You know, we wanted to do things like maybe spend some money that they didn't want to spend, and wanted to support education more. Education was always something we argued about.
I ran for the agenda chairman. That got me in front of the group all the time. When I got the job, the previous guy read every bill, discussed everything. I created a one-page thing that I gave to every minority leader. Their job was to report on the bill. I didn't have to read any bills if I didn't want to, but Bill Ridden would do education, so they all participated. And one of the things I did from very early on and had thoughts about, if I ever become a leader, I want to share the power.
Today's program has focused on the people who made up the Kansas Legislature and who served in the last part of the 20th century. Their interviews document what they had to do to pass legislation or create programs to help the people of Kansas. The composition of the Kansas Legislature has changed significantly since its early days. As the legislature becomes more diverse in its membership, it will continue to evolve, reflecting the philosophy and experiences of its body. The Kansas Oral History Project is committed to capturing the experiences of its leaders and its rank-and-file members, and making those transcripts and videos of interviews available to the public. For more information, go to the website ksoralhistory.org.